He was a titan of Wall Street, a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will. She was the perfect wife, an elegant shadow who hosted his galas and warmed his bed. To the world, Kate and Athena Vance were a golden couple, the epitome of wealth and power. But behind the gilded doors of their Manhattan penthouse, a different story was being written. It was a story of quiet desperation, of secrets kept locked away like jewels. And it all came to a head on a Tuesday evening, over a meal of seared scallops and shattered vows. When he made the biggest mistake of his life, he underestimated her. He thought she was just a wife. He was about to find out she was a warrior. The crystal glasses on the table at Per Se sparkled, catching the late evening light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Each tiny rainbow that danced on the crisp white tablecloth was a testament to the life Kate Vance had built. A life of exquisite taste, of rarefied air, of untouchable success. Athena, his wife of 12 years, sat opposite him, a vision in a sapphire blue dress that matched the velvet of the chairs. To any casual observer, they were the picture of marital bliss, a power couple dining at one of New York City's most exclusive 3 Michelin-star restaurants. The waiter, a man whose posture was as starched as his uniform, had just finished describing the oysters and pearls, a signature dish of sabayon of pearl tapioca with Island Creek oysters and sterling white sturgeon caviar. Kate had ordered it without a glance at the menu. His eyes, the color of faded denim, fixed on his wife with an intensity that had once made her heart flutter. Now, it sent a chill down her spine. "Did you hear me, Athena?" Kate's voice was smooth, a polished stone of authority. It was the same voice he used to command his hedge fund, Sterling Vance Global. The same voice that had made him a legend on Wall Street before he'd even turned 40. Athena offered a small, practiced smile. "Of course, darling. Oysters and pearls. It sounds divine." She picked up her water glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips, a welcome anchor in the suddenly turbulent sea of her own intuition. Something was wrong. The air was thick with it, an unspoken tension that the polite hum of the restaurant couldn't dissipate. Kate hadn't been home for dinner in weeks. His life was a whirlwind of international flights, late-night conference calls, and the endless pursuit of more. More money, more power, more everything. So this sudden, intimate dinner at a place he knew she adored was an anomaly. It was a gesture so out of character that it could only mean one of two things, a grand, conciliatory surprise, or the prelude to a carefully orchestrated execution. As the first course arrived, a delicate mosaic of artfully arranged seafood, Athena's sense of dread solidified. Kate ate with mechanical precision, his fork and knife moving with an unnerving lack of enjoyment. He was a man going through the motions, a performer on a stage of his own making. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Athena," he began, placing his cutlery down with a soft click. He looked at her, then, truly looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the man she had married. The ambitious, charming, slightly reckless man who had swept her off her feet at a charity gala all those years ago. But the warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cool, calculating glint she had come to associate with his business dealings. "About us," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were sharing a stock tip. "About our future." Athena's heart began a frantic staccato against her ribs. She kept her expression serene, a mask she had perfected over years of society events and tense board member dinners. Inside, she was a wreck of nerves. She knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the diamonds on her wrist, that this was not about a surprise trip to the Maldives. The main course was served, seared scallops for her, a dry-aged côte de boeuf for him. The rich aroma filled the space between them, a stark contrast to the emotional void that had been growing for years. "We've had a good run, you and I," Kate said, slicing into his steak with surgical precision. "We were a great team. You with your grace and your social connections. Me with the capital." He smirked, a self-satisfied curl of his lips that she had once found endearing and now found repulsive. "Kate, what is this?" Athena's voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm. She would not allow him to see her crumble. "Not here. Not ever." He sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured regret. "We've grown apart, Athena. It's no one's fault. It just happens." He reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke Tom Ford suit, the fabric a dark, expensive gray that seemed to absorb the light around it. He pulled out a crisp, folded document in a manila envelope. He slid it across the table. The envelope moved with a soft, insidious hiss, coming to a stop just beside her plate of half-eaten scallops. The corner of it touched the rich, buttery sauce, a small, obscene stain on its pristine surface. "What is this?" she asked again, though she already knew. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her feeling cold and strangely distant, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. "The divorce papers," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My lawyer, Arthur Klein, drew them up. It's all very standard, generous even. I've taken care of you, Athena. You'll be very comfortable." Comfortable? The word hung in the air, a grotesque understatement of the life he was proposing for her, a life without him, a life without the identity she had so carefully curated as Mrs. Kate Vance. She stared at the envelope, at the small, greasy stain. It was a punctuation mark on the end of her marriage, a final, vulgar insult. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on them, their curiosity piqued by the hushed, intense nature of their conversation. She could feel the waiter hovering in the periphery, his professional discretion warring with his human desire to witness the drama unfolding. Athena did not cry. She did not scream. She did not throw her wine in his face, as the more theatrical part of her soul urged her to do. Instead, a strange, unnerving calm washed over her. It was the calm of a captain in a storm, the calm of a soldier on the eve of battle. She lifted her gaze from the envelope and met her husband's eyes. He looked smug, confident, already picturing his new life, his new wife, probably that impossibly young, impossibly blonde art consultant she'd seen him with at the Met Gala, a girl whose name she had purposefully forgotten. "I see," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble floors of their penthouse. She picked up her fork and knife. She speared a scallop, dragged it through the sauce, and brought it to her lips. She chewed slowly, deliberately, savoring the taste, savoring the moment. She would not let him ruin her last meal as Mrs. Kate Vance. Kate watched her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected tears, recriminations, a scene. This quiet, unnerving composure was not part of his plan. "I'll have my assistant arrange for your things to be moved out of the penthouse," he said, his voice a little tighter now. "You can stay at the plaza for as long as you need, on my account, of course." "That's very thoughtful of you, Kate," she said, her voice laced with an irony so subtle he missed it entirely. She took another bite of her scallop. "And the jet? Will I still have access to the Gulf Stream?" He chuckled, a short, sharp sound of derision. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Athena. The jet is a business asset." "Of course," she said, dabbing her lips with her napkin. Silly of me to ask. She finished her meal in silence, each bite a small act of defiance. Kate grew increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, checking his Patek Philippe watch. He had expected a swift, clean amputation. This was more like a slow, agonizing surgery, and he was beginning to feel like the patient. When the waiter came to clear their plates, Athena gave him a warm, genuine smile. "The scallops were exquisite," she said. "Please give my compliments to the chef." Kate stared at her, dumbfounded. It was as if she had already accepted her fate, as if the last 12 years of their life together were nothing more than a meal to be consumed and forgotten. He paid the bill, a staggering sum that he didn't even bother to look at, and they stood to leave. He reached for her arm, a gesture of hollow chivalry, but she stepped back, her movement fluid and graceful. "I can manage," she said, her voice cool. They walked out of the restaurant in silence, the doorman holding the heavy glass door open for them. The cool night air of Columbus Circle hit Athena's face, a welcome shock after the stifling atmosphere of the restaurant. Kate's driver, a stoic man named Thomas who had been with him for years, was waiting by the curb with the gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom. Kate opened the rear door for her, the master of his universe once more. "I'll have Thomas take you to the plaza," he said. Athena paused. She looked at the car, at the life it represented, at the man who was so carelessly casting her aside. And then she did something he never would have predicted. She smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced, placid one she wore for society. This smile was sharp and bright and held a promise of things to come. "No thank you, Kate," she said, her voice clear and strong in the New York night. "I think I'll take a taxi." And with that, she turned and walked away. Her sapphire dress was a streak of defiance against the city lights, leaving Kate standing on the curb, the divorce papers a useless, stained artifact in a world he was about to discover he no longer controlled. Athena did not take a taxi. She walked. She walked with a purpose she hadn't felt in years, her heels clicking a steady, determined rhythm on the pavement of Central Park South. The city's symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a subway deep beneath her feet, the cacophony of a dozen different languages was a balm to her shattered nerves. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Kate thought he was divorcing a socialite, a pretty, well-mannered accessory who knew how to pick out fine china and throw a flawless dinner party. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Vance. He had forgotten the girl who had graduated top of her class from MIT with a dual degree in computer science and mathematics. The girl who had been recruited by the NSA before she was 22. The girl who had turned them down, not for lack of skill, but for a deep-seated aversion to the rigid, patriarchal structures of government. The girl who had, for a few thrilling, anonymous years, been a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom known only by the handle, Nix, in the clandestine corners of the dark web. She had given it all up for love, or what she had thought was love. Kate, with his boundless ambition and magnetic charm, had been a force of nature. He had promised her the world, and in his own way, he had delivered. But the price of that world had been her own identity. She had willingly, foolishly placed the sharpest parts of herself in a velvet-lined box and handed it to him for safekeeping. He, in his arrogance, had simply forgotten it was there. Her destination was not the Plaza Hotel with its gilded ceilings and ghosts of old money. It was a nondescript brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in the West Village, a property she had purchased years ago under a shell corporation, one of many secrets she had kept from her all-knowing, all-controlling husband. Inside, the apartment was a stark contrast to the opulent, sterile penthouse she had called home. It was minimalist, functional, and humming with the low thrum of powerful technology. This was her sanctuary, her command center. This was where Athena Vance ceased to exist, and Nyx was reborn. She shed the sapphire dress, letting it pool on the floor like a discarded skin. In its place, she pulled on a simple black t-shirt and yoga pants. She tied her dark hair back, her movements efficient and precise. Then she sat down at the custom-built computer rig that took up an entire wall of the main room. 3 monitors glowed to life, reflecting in her intense, focused eyes. For 12 years, she had been the perfect wife. She had smiled and nodded and played her part. But she had not been idle. She had watched. She had listened. She had learned. She had seen the way Kate moved his money, the complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and blind trusts he used to shield his vast fortune from taxes, from competitors, from the world. He had bragged about it to her on more than one occasion, drunk on champagne and his own genius, never once imagining that the woman he dismissed as a beautiful simpleton was mentally mapping his financial empire, identifying its vulnerabilities, its backdoors, its kill switches. He had built his kingdom on the shifting sands of the digital world, and she was its architect. She had helped him design the security protocols for Sterling Vance Global in its early days, a fun little project, he had called it. He had taken her brilliant, innovative code and passed it off as his own, a footnote in their history he had long since forgotten. But she hadn't. She remembered every line, every algorithm, every deliberately placed secret backdoor she had woven into the fabric of his digital fortress. A backdoor only she could open. A key only she possessed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room, a relentless, rhythmic assault. It was a language she was more fluent in than English, a world where she was not a wife, but a god. She started with the small, peripheral accounts, first the slush fund for his discretionary expenses, which she knew included lavish gifts for a certain blonde art consultant. A few million here, a few million there, transferred not to her own name, of course. That would be amateurish. Instead, the money was sliced and diced, routed through a dizzying labyrinth of cryptocurrencies, Monero, Scash, Grin, all chosen for their untraceable, privacy-enhancing features. From there, it was funneled into a dozen newly created accounts in banks stretching from the Cayman Islands to Liechtenstein, all opened under pseudonyms and protected by layers of encryption that would make the NSA's top cryptographers weep. Next, she went for the personal brokerage accounts, E-Trade, Charles Schwab, Fidelity. Kate, in his hubris, used a single, complex password for all of them, a string of characters based on the date he had closed his first billion-dollar deal. A date he had once called the most important day of my life, right in front of her. She had smiled, topped up his champagne, and filed that little tidbit away in the recesses of her mind. The password was a fortress, but a fortress with a key, and she had it. Within minutes, she had liquidated his entire personal stock portfolio. Hundreds of millions of dollars in blue-chip stocks, tech giants, and emerging market funds. The market would barely register the massive sell-off until the morning, and by then, it would be too late. The proceeds were immediately converted into a stable coin, DAI, and moved to a decentralized finance, DeFi, lending protocol, where it was borrowed against, swapped, and scattered across the blockchain, becoming a ghost of its former self. The sun was beginning to cast its first pale gray light over the city when she finally breached the main gate, Sterling Vance Global's primary operating account. This was the heart of the beast, the dragon's hoard. It was protected by a multi-signature authentication process, requiring 3 separate digital keys for any major transfer. One was Kate's. The second belonged to his CFO, a man named David Chen. The third, they believed, was held in a secure offline vault, a last line of defense against any conceivable cyber attack. They were wrong. The third key had never been in a vault. The third key was a piece of code she had written herself, a phantom signature that could be activated by a unique, time-sensitive algorithm linked to a sequence of prime numbers. It was her masterpiece, her Trojan horse, planted in the heart of his empire years ago, waiting for this very moment. She initiated the transfer, a breathtaking sum, $975 million. The system prompted for the three keys. Key 1, Kate Vance. She bypassed it using the backdoor she had built, a flaw in the system's architecture that only she knew existed. Key 2, David Chen. She already had his credentials. She had socially engineered them out of him a year ago over a glass of Chardonnay at a charity auction by pretending to have forgotten the Wi-Fi password for the event. He had gallantly typed it into her phone for her, and in doing so, had unwittingly given her access to a keystroke logger she had discreetly installed. He used the same password for everything. People always did. Key 3, the vault. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, inputting the prime number sequence. The algorithm came to life. The phantom signature was generated. Authentication successful. Transfer initiated. She watched as the progress bar crept across the screen. $975 million from Sterling Vance Global, New York to an anonymous, encrypted wallet on the other side of the world. Transfer complete. She leaned back in her chair, the first rays of dawn illuminating her face. It was done. The entire liquid fortune of Kate Vance, a man who measured his worth in dollars and cents, had vanished into the digital ether. He was a king without a kingdom, a dragon without his gold. She thought of him waking up in their penthouse, alone in the king-sized bed. He would reach for his phone, as he always did, to check the markets. He would see the alerts, the liquidations, the transfers. He would feel a flicker of confusion, then annoyance, then a dawning, gut-wrenching horror as he realized the true scale of the devastation. He would call his bankers, his lawyers, his tech support. They would find nothing. No trace, no trail, no culprit. Just an empty vault and the lingering, ghostly echo of a digital phantom named Nyx. Athena stood up and stretched, her body aching from the long night. She walked to the window and looked out at the waking city. The sapphire dress lay on the floor, a crumpled reminder of the woman she had been. She was not that woman anymore. Kate had slid the divorce papers across the table while she was still eating. By morning, his bank account was empty. He had wanted to erase her from his life. Instead, she had erased his. The game had just begun, and she had already won. Kate Vance woke to the familiar, sterile silence of his penthouse. The morning sun, usually a welcome guest, streamed through the panoramic windows with an almost accusatory glare, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, mocking spirits. He reached across the vast expanse of the custom-made bed, his hand patting the empty space where Athena should have been. A faint, lingering scent of her perfume, Jo Malone's peony and blush suede, was the only evidence she had ever been there at all. He grunted, a sound of satisfaction. It was done. Clean, efficient. He had excised the weakest part of his life, and now he was free to pursue his merger with the future. A future embodied by a 26-year-old named Anastasia, whose primary assets were a flawless bone structure and an uncritical admiration for his genius. His morning routine was as precise and unvarying as a Swiss watch. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet sinking into the plush white carpet. He strode into the master bathroom, a cavern of Italian marble and chrome, and stepped onto the smart scale. His weight, body fat percentage, and hydration levels flashed up on the mirrored screen. All optimal. He was a machine, finely tuned and perfectly maintained. He showered, the water pressure a precise, invigorating torrent. As he shaved, he issued a series of commands to his home AI, a disembodied female voice he called Juno. Juno, what's the Hang Seng doing? The Hang Seng index is down 0.4%, Kate. And the pre-market for sterling Vance? SVG is currently trading up 1.2% in pre-market. A small, smug smile played on his lips. Of course it was. Everything he touched turned to gold. He was the Midas of the modern age. He dressed in a crisp white shirt and a charcoal gray suit, the fabric whispering of wealth. He slipped the Patek Philippe onto his wrist, its familiar weight a comforting reassurance of his place in the world. It was only then, as he sat on the edge of the bed to put on his hand-stitched Italian leather shoes, that he reached for his phone on the bedside table. And the world began to tilt on its axis. The screen was a sea of red. A cascade of notifications from his various banking and brokerage apps. Fidelity alert, a full liquidation of your portfolio has been executed. Charles Schwab alert, your account balance is $0. Bank of America private bank alert, a wire transfer of $2,345,789.15 has been completed. Your new balance is $12.54. He stared at the phone, his brain refusing to process the information. It was impossible. A glitch, a system error, some sort of elaborate, unfunny prank. He tried to open his primary Sterling Vance global mobile banking app, the one that gave him a real-time overview of the company's core financials. Access denied. Your credentials are no longer valid. The blood drained from his face. The finely tuned machine of his body suddenly felt cold, sluggish. He tried again. And again. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. A primal roar of frustration and rage ripped from his throat, echoing through the silent, cavernous penthouse. He threw the phone against the wall, where it shattered, the screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 tiny fractures, a perfect metaphor for his crumbling reality. He scrambled for his laptop, his movements clumsy, frantic. He bypassed the sleek, user-friendly interface and went straight for the mainframe, his fingers flying across the keys with a desperate, forgotten muscle memory from his early days as a coder. The numbers he saw on the screen were not just numbers. They were the building blocks of his identity, the very foundation of his ego. And they were gone. The main operating account, $1,432.29. The reserve fund, $5,678.12. The offshore holding accounts in the Caymans, in Switzerland, in Singapore empty. All of them, drained to the last cent. A billion-dollar empire, built over 2 decades of ruthless ambition and relentless work, had evaporated overnight. It wasn't just the money. It was the precision. The sheer, impossible speed of it all. This wasn't a hack. A hack was messy, traceable. This was an assassination. A clean, silent, devastatingly elegant execution. And then he knew. It couldn't be. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly insane that he almost dismissed it. Athena. His quiet, demure, technologically illiterate wife. The woman who still called him to ask how to attach a photo to an email. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, creeping dread began to seep into his bones. He started to see it, to connect the dots he had been too arrogant to even notice before. The way her eyes would sometimes glaze over when he talked about his work, a look he had always mistaken for boredom but now recognized as intense concentration. The strange technical questions she would sometimes ask, disguised as idle curiosity. The long afternoons she spent at the museum or with her charity committee, periods of time when she was completely unreachable. He had once come home early and found her in her study, a room he rarely entered, staring at a screen filled with what looked like gibberish. She had clicked it off quickly, smiling her serene smile. "Just trying to learn a bit about how your world works, darling," she had said. "It's all so fascinatingly complex." He had patted her on the head, a condescending gesture of affection, and told her not to worry her pretty little head about it. The memory now sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated fear through him. He had not just underestimated her. He had been blind to her. Utterly, catastrophically blind. His first call was to Arthur Klein, his lawyer. "She did it, Arthur. The bitch took everything." Kate's voice was a ragged, unrecognizable shriek. "Kate, calm down. What are you talking about? Who took what?" "Athena. She cleaned me out. Everything. The company accounts, my personal funds. All of it." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Kate, that's not possible. The security protocols on the SVG accounts are state-of-the-art. You designed them yourself." "She helped me," Kate whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "In the beginning. She helped me build the damn thing." His second call was to David Chen, his CFO. It went straight to voicemail. A text message from an unknown number pinged on his shattered phone a moment later. It was a picture of David Chen, bound and gagged in what looked like a hotel room, a copy of the day's Wall Street Journal held up next to his terrified face to prove the time and date. The message below the image was simple. "David is resigning, effective immediately. He wishes you the best in your future endeavors. Don't call the police. It will be bad for his health. And for yours." Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a coup, a hostile takeover of his entire life. He spent the next few hours in a state of frantic, impotent fury. He called his contacts at the FBI's cybercrime division, powerful men he had cultivated over years of donations and political favors. They listened, they sympathized, but they were powerless. The money was gone, vanished into the decentralized, unregulated wilderness of the blockchain. Tracing it, they said, would be like trying to trace a single drop of water in the ocean. He called his bankers. They were apologetic but firm. The transfers were all authenticated. The signatures were all valid. As far as they were concerned, everything was legal and above board. By noon, the news had started to leak. A junior analyst at Sterling Vance, unable to process a routine transaction, had raised an alarm. The rumor mill of Wall Street began to churn, slowly at first, then with accelerating, vicious speed. SVG is insolvent. Kate Vance is broke. The king has been dethroned. The pre-market gains vanished, replaced by a catastrophic plunge. His company's stock, the bedrock of his remaining non-liquid wealth, was in freefall. Margin calls started flooding in, demanding collateral he no longer possessed. He stood in the center of his magnificent penthouse, the city skyline spread out before him like a kingdom that was no longer his. He was trapped, a prisoner in his own gilded cage. The silence of the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. It was the silence of a tomb. He thought of Athena, of her calm, composed face as she ate her scallops, her quiet defiance, her smile as she walked away into the night. It hadn't been a smile of defeat. It had been a smile of victory. She had been playing a different game all along, a long, patient game of chess, while he had been playing checkers. He had slid the divorce papers across the table, thinking he was ending a chapter. He had just handed the pen to the author of his ruin. The empire of Kate Vance had not fallen. It had been meticulously, brilliantly, and silently dismantled from the inside out. And he, the master of the universe, had never even seen it coming. While Kate Vance was watching his world burn, Athena was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, sipping green tea in the hushed, anonymous comfort of a first-class cabin. She wasn't on a commercial flight. She was on a private charter, a sleek Bombardier Global 7500, paid for with a cryptocurrency transfer so obscure it barely registered on any exchange. The plane had been booked under the name Dr. Evelyn Reed, a respected if reclusive ornithologist on her way to a conference in Lisbon. Her destination was not Lisbon. It was a small private airfield just outside of Zug, Switzerland, a place affectionately known as Crypto Valley. It was the global epicenter of financial technology and digital assets, a haven for the brilliant, the paranoid, and the radically anti-establishment. It was, in short, her kind of town. Athena, or rather Evelyn, looked out the window at the endless blue expanse of the ocean. She felt a sense of calm that was as deep and vast as the water below. It wasn't the giddy thrill of revenge. It was something more profound. It was the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation finally solved, of a meticulously crafted plan executed to perfection. The man sitting across from her, a lanky, pale individual with a shock of unruly red hair and a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate at a different frequency from the rest of the world, was named Miles. In the digital world, he was known as Deadless. He was a legendary coder, a prodigy who had made a fortune in the early days of Bitcoin and then vanished from public life, disgusted by the corporate greed that had co-opted the decentralized dream. Athena had found him not through money, but through a shared language of code. She had reached out to him on a secure, encrypted channel, proving her bona fides by solving a cryptographic puzzle he had posted years ago as a test, one that no one had ever been able to crack. He was the only person on Earth she trusted to help her build the final phase of her new life. The assets are nested, Miles said, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his laptop, which was hardwired directly into the plane's satellite internet. The DeFi protocols are holding. We've layered the smart contract so that any attempt to freeze one asset automatically triggers a swap and a move to a new wallet. It's a hydra. They cut off one head, two more grow in its place. And David Chen? Athena asked, her voice calm. Safely ensconced at the Dolder Grand in Zurich, Miles replied with a grin. He was surprisingly cooperative once we explained the situation. Seems his loyalty to Kate was directly proportional to the number of zeros in his bonus check. We've set him up with a new identity and a comfortable, if not extravagant, nest egg. He's more than happy to disappear. Athena nodded. It had been a necessary, if distasteful, part of the plan. Neutralizing Chen had been crucial. Leaving him in New York would have created a loose end, a potential witness who could, under pressure, begin to piece together a narrative. Chen, the terrified hostage, was a far more useful fiction than Chen, the disgruntled, talkative ex-CFO. The final stage is ready, Miles continued, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. Project Chimera is live. Project Chimera was Athena's true masterpiece. It was more than just hiding Kate's money, it was about giving it a new purpose. For years, she had watched Kate's immoral pursuit of wealth. He invested in companies that exploited workers, that polluted the environment, that profited from human misery. He called it capitalism. She called it a crime. Chimera was the antidote. It was a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, governed not by a CEO or a board of directors, but by unbreakable smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. Its purpose was to identify and fund projects that Kate would have sneered at, green energy startups, fair trade cooperatives, independent journalism outlets, and educational programs for underprivileged women in STEM. The $1 billion she had taken from Kate Vance would now be the seed capital for a new kind of Empyrean empire of progress, of ethics, of hope. The funds would be allocated by a community of token holders, all of whom would be vetted and chosen by Athena and Miles for their expertise and integrity. It was a self-sustaining, self-governing engine for positive change, funded by the ill-gotten gains of a titan of toxic capitalism. It was poetry. Upon landing in Zug, Athena was met not by a limousine, but by a discreet electric Audi. She was taken to a secure, modern apartment overlooking the lake, a place that was registered to yet another shell corporation, this one based in Panama. The life of Athena Vance, with its society galas, its designer clothes, and its suffocating expectations, was over. The life of Nix the architect, the ghost, the silent force for change had just begun. Back in New York, Kate was a man besieged. His lawyers were in damage control, his PR team was issuing frantic, unconvincing denials, and his remaining employees were fleeing a sinking ship. The SEC had launched a formal investigation. The board of directors, the same men who had clapped him on the back and profited from his ruthlessness for years, were now calling for his head. He had hired a team of the best private cybersecurity investigators money could buy, a firm called Cortex Forensics run by a former Mossad agent. They had descended upon his office, their faces grim, their equipment a dazzling array of high-tech wizardry. After 48 hours of relentless, round-the-clock work, the lead investigator, a severe-looking man named Kobe, had delivered the verdict. He had stood in the center of Kate's now chaotic office, his expression a mixture of professional respect and pity. "Mr. Vance," Kobe had said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "What we have here. It's not a hack. It's a work of art. The architecture is flawless. The execution, perfect. Every trail leads to a dead end. Every digital footprint vanishes into thin air. We've seen state-sponsored cyber warfare that was less sophisticated than this." Kobe paused, running a hand over his shaved head. "Whoever did this wasn't just a thief. They were a ghost. A phantom. They knew your systems better than you did. They were inside the walls before you even built the house." Kate had just stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "Her name," he had whispered, "is Athena." Kobe had simply shaken his head. "We can find no digital trace of any Athena connected to this. The entity that perpetrated this attack has no name, no face. In the few fragmented data packets we've managed to recover, there's only one recurring signature. A single word in Greek." "What is it?" Kate had asked, his voice trembling. "Nix," Kobe had replied. "It means night. The name sent a fresh wave of ice through Kate's veins. He remembered a conversation from years ago, on their honeymoon in Greece. They had been visiting the temple of Hephaestus in Athens. Athena had been staring at the ancient stones, a strange, wistful look on her face. If you could be any of the Greek gods, he had asked her, who would you be? He had expected her to say Aphrodite or Hera, a goddess of beauty or marriage. Nyx, she had said without hesitation. The goddess of the night. She was a primordial entity, so powerful that even Zeus feared her. He had laughed, dismissing it as a morbid, romantic fantasy. He hadn't understood. He hadn't been listening. The divorce papers, now sitting on his desk, seemed like a relic from another lifetime, a foolish, arrogant miscalculation that had cost him everything. He had thought he was setting himself free. He had only succeeded in unshackling a goddess. And she, in turn, had plunged his world into an endless, starless night. He was no longer Kate Vance, the Titan. He was just a man alone in the dark, haunted by the ghost of the woman he had so spectacularly failed to see. The first public statement from Project Chimera appeared 1 week after the heist. It wasn't a press release sent to mainstream media outlets. It was a signed message posted on a decentralized publishing platform, immutable and uncensorable. The message was elegant, precise, and devastating. It didn't mention Kate Vance by name. It didn't have to. It spoke of a significant, involuntary philanthropic donation from a major player in the predatory financial sector. It detailed with surgical accuracy how this capital, once used to fund environmental degradation and labor exploitation, would now be redeployed to support their opposites. The message was signed with a single, cryptic initial, N. The story exploded. The financial world, already reeling from the rumors of Sterling Vance's collapse, was now faced with a narrative that was part Robin Hood, part Sun Tzu. Kate wasn't just broke, he was a punchline, a cautionary tale about hubris and the hidden dangers of underestimating the person sleeping next to you. His name, once a symbol of power and success, was now inextricably linked with this act of grand, poetic justice. For Kate, it was the final, crushing blow. He was a pariah on Wall Street, a leper in the exclusive social circles he had once dominated. His friends no longer took his calls. The invitations to galas and fundraisers had stopped. Anastasia, his vision of the future, had vanished. Her final communication was a text message that read, "Sorry, I can't do this. My psychic told me your aura is, like, super toxic RN." He was forced to sell the penthouse for a fraction of its worth to cover his mounting legal fees and personal debts. The Rolls-Royce was repossessed. The Patek Philippe was sold to a pawnbroker on 47th Street. He moved into a sterile, soulless corporate apartment in Midtown, a place that felt more like a witness protection safe house than a home. He was obsessed. The money was gone. His reputation was shattered. But his mind had narrowed to a single, burning point of focus, finding Athena. It was no longer about revenge. It was about understanding. He needed to look her in the eye and ask her the question that haunted his every waking moment: why? He poured the last of his accessible funds into hiring Kobe's firm, not to recover the money, but to hunt for a ghost. Forget the digital trail, he had told the ex-Mossad agent, his voice raw with desperation. Look for the human one. Travel records, property deeds, anything. She has to be somewhere. Kobe and his team were good. They were the best. They sifted through the wreckage of Athena's former life, looking for clues. They discovered the Shell Corporation that owned the West Village brownstone. They found the digital breadcrumbs that led to the private charter flight. They traced the ghost to Zurich. It was Kobe himself who called Kate with the news. "We have a possible location. The Dolder Grand Hotel. A woman matching her description has been seen there. She's using the name Dr. Elena Petrova, a supposed art historian." A surge of adrenaline, the first positive feeling he'd had in weeks, shot through Kate. "I'm on the next flight," he said. 2 days later, Kate Vance walked into the opulent, old-world lobby of the Dolder Grand. He was a shadow of his former self. His expensive suit hung on his thinner frame, his eyes were sunken and bloodshot, and his movements were filled with a nervous, twitchy energy. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man on the edge of a complete nervous breakdown. He saw her immediately. She was sitting on the garden terrace, overlooking the city of Zurich and the shimmering lake beyond. She was not hiding. She was waiting. She wore a simple, elegant white linen dress, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked serene, confident, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. There was a strength in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that had never been there in their old life. He approached her table slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She simply watched him come, a calm, unreadable expression on her face. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Kate," she said, her voice even and cool. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." He sank into the chair, his legs suddenly weak. He stared at her, the woman who had been his wife, the woman who had become his nemesis. "Athena," he breathed. "Why?" She took a slow sip of her tea before answering. "You never saw me, Kate." "Not really. You saw a reflection of yourself, an accessory that complemented your lifestyle. You saw a piece of property, and when you got tired of it, you tried to dispose of it with a severance package, as if I were a redundant employee." "I loved you," he said, the words feeling hollow and false, even to his own ears. "No," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "You loved the idea of me. You loved having a wife who was smart enough to be interesting, but not so smart that she might challenge you. You loved having a beautiful hostess for your parties. You loved the convenience of me. But you never once asked me what I wanted. You never once cared to know who I truly was." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "That night at Per Se, when you slid those papers across the table, you didn't just end our marriage. You set me free. You reminded me of the woman I was before I met you. The woman you tried so hard to forget." Kate was speechless. Every word she spoke was the undeniable, devastating truth. He had been a fool, blinded by his own reflection in the glittering funhouse of his success. "The money," he finally managed to stammer. "Why take it all? Why ruin me?" "It was never your money, Kate," she said, her voice laced with a cold fire. "You didn't earn it. You accumulated it. You were a dragon sitting on a hoard of gold you did nothing with but count. That money was amassed through deals that destroyed lives, wrecked communities, and poisoned the planet. I didn't steal it. I liberated it." She gestured vaguely towards the city below. "That money is now funding dozens of projects around the world. It's building schools in Uganda. It's reforesting parts of the Amazon. It's providing microloans to female entrepreneurs in India. It's doing the good in the world that you were always too selfish and too soulless to even consider. The scale of her vision, the sheer audacity of her plan, hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been playing for status, for ego. She had been playing for the world. It was the final, humiliating checkmate. "So what now?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. "What happens to me?" Athena leaned back in her chair, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her eyes. "That, Kate, is entirely up to you. For the first time in your life, you are a man with no fortune, no power, and no influence. You are just a man. You can see that as a prison, or you can see it as an opportunity. You can finally learn what it means to build something real, something of actual value. Or you can fade into obscurity. The choice is yours." She stood up, her white dress catching the gentle Swiss breeze. "Goodbye, Kate." She turned and walked away, not looking back. She moved with the grace and purpose of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. Kate Vance sat alone at the table, a forgotten king in a foreign land, with nothing but the wreckage of his past and the terrifying, empty canvas of his future. The check had come, and he had finally discovered the true cost of underestimating the woman who had been eating her dinner while he planned the end of her world, never realizing she was about to begin his. Years passed. The name Kate Vance faded from the headlines, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of Project Chimera's successes. In a remote corner of the Amazon, a man with haunted eyes and hands calloused from real labor worked alongside a team of local conservationists, planting saplings in soil reclaimed from illegal logging. He never spoke of his past. He was known only as a quiet volunteer who had appeared one day, seeking not money or power, but purpose. One afternoon, thousands of miles away in a minimalist office overlooking Lake Zurich, a woman received a progress report on the Amazon reforestation project. She scrolled through the photos: lush greenery, thriving wildlife, a community reborn. In the background of one shot, almost out of focus, was the volunteer. She paused, zooming in on his face. He was older, weathered by the sun, but a faint, peaceful smile touched his lips. It was a look she had never seen on him before. Athena leaned back, a genuine smile of her own gracing her face. Her plan had not just been about tearing down an empire of greed, it had been about creating the space for something better to grow. Not just for the world, but for the man she once knew. He had finally learned to build something of value. So, what's the lesson in the story of Kate and Athena Vance? Is it a tale of revenge, or is it something more? It's a story about visibility, about what happens when we refuse to see the people right in front of us, when we value wealth over worth and power over partnership. Kate Vance didn't just lose his money. He lost the chance to know the incredible woman he was married to. He saw a possession, and in the end, he was dispossessed of everything that mattered. Her victory wasn't just in emptying his bank account. It was in reclaiming her own identity, rewriting her future, and in a way, even saving his. What do you think? Was Athena a hero, a villain, or something in between? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of a woman scorned and a titan toppled compelling, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good story of justice, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us that the quietest people often have the most to say.